Today, we're talking about how every day we inch closer and closer to living in an episode of Black Mirror. Elon Musk is throwing money at Mr. Beast and others to try and fend off Threads. Fox News is being sued for defamation, but this time by a Trump supporter. Dark money is controlling elections, and Democrats may actually be taking in more than Republicans. The disturbing truth of what happened with that migrant vote. We're talking about all that and so much more on your brand new Sunday Philip DeFranco show. You daily dive into the news, so buckle up, hit that like button, and let's just jump into it. Starting with Friday marked the actors' official first day on the picket lines, and they seemingly have a lot to be pissed about. Because notably, after the leadership for the Screen Actors Guild announced the strike, they took questions about the negotiations they had been having with the studios represented by a group called the AMPTP. And Chief Negotiator Duncan Crabtree Ireland said that the AMPTP had offered some pretty insulting proposals regarding AI.
They proposed that our background performers should be able to be scanned, get paid for 1 day's pay, and their company should own that scan, their image, their likeness, and should be able to use it for the rest of eternity in any project they want with no consent and no compensation. So if you think that's a groundbreaking proposal, I suggest you think again.
Which you might think, hey, that's just for background work. It sounds like a shitty deal, but that's just for one thing. Which many would argue, okay, but it is a huge thing. With Rolling Stone explaining, background work serves as a pathway for actors looking to break into the business, allowing them to learn how a set operates, meet fellow actors and industry connections, and eventually can lead to qualifying for SAG-AFTRA membership, which in turn can help land bigger roles. Which is why we've seen a bunch of actors slamming the proposal and telling the outlet, it literally was all of our worst fears confirmed when we heard that. It's crazy. It's wrong. It's taking money out of people's pockets, saying it will make it impossible to break into the industry. And major actors like John Cusack speaking out and writing, studios want to have extras work 1 day, scan them, own their likeness forever, and eliminate them from the business. And do you think they'll stop with extras? That's what AI is, a giant copyright identity theft. Now, for their part, the AMPTP has denied SAG's claims here, saying the claim made today by SAG-AFTRA leadership that the digital replicas of background actors may be used in perpetuity with no consent or compensation is false. And adding, in fact, the current AMPTP proposal only permits a company to use the digital replica of a background actor in the motion picture for which the background actor is employed. Any other use requires the background actor's consent and bargaining for the use subject to a minimum payment. But even there, you have people saying any proposal where AI can replace an actor's day on set is not great news for the actor, because likely it'll be at a lesser rate and they won't have the ability to make connections in the industry. So actually with all this, we've seen tons of people comparing this situation to a recent episode of Black Mirror titled Joan is Awful. And that's because the plot of the episode sees Joan, played by Annie Murphy, realize that her real life has become the plot of a show on Streamberry, which is supposed to be a parody of Netflix. And it looks like Joan's being played on the show by Salma Hayek, but it's actually not Salma herself, rather an AI-generated version of her likeness that executives commission. So you have places like Mary Sue running headlines saying, can someone please tell the AMPTP that Black Mirror is not supposed to be aspirational? And others just saying that studios are basically going to remove humanity from art by doing this. But of course, also very important to mention in the situation, this is just one aspect of the negotiations. And the reason we're talking about that one, it just so happens to be one of the most jarring and kind of dystopian. But for now, that's where we are. We're going to keep our eyes on the situation, and it's going to be very interesting to see how this double strike pans out. And then Twitter is fighting for its life right now, and they're now writing checks to top creators. With Twitter starting to send out payments this week, a few months after the program was first announced back in February, where Elon Musk previously saying that the first block of money will total $5 million, with that cash reportedly coming from and involving ad revenue sharing starting in the replies of people's posts. And in order to be eligible, you either have to pay for Twitter Blue or be affiliated with a verified organization and have at least 5 million impressions in each of the last 3 months. Though reportedly, some content is not eligible for monetization, like sexual content, posts depicting criminal behavior, abuse or harm, and copyright infringement. And this week, we saw a number of people all over Twitter getting some big checks. Over on the political right, you have accounts like End Wokeness making $10,000. Andrew Tate posting that he made $20,000, with Tate specifically claiming that all that money will go to the Tate Pledge Foundation. Then on the other end of the political spectrum, you had the Krasenstein brothers, though you have some people saying, they're not necessarily left, they're more just about making money, with them reportedly getting around $25,000 each. And then just other generally popular accounts getting money, with reporting coming from the meme account Internet Hall of Fame getting the highest payout so far of over $100,000. And something that we've seen is that even though people from varying ideologies have gotten paid, you also have some wondering if the whole situation kind of just favors pro-Elon accounts, with people pointing to things like Elon Alerts getting paid over $2,000. Though also with the situation, we've seen some people like Mr. Beast doing interesting things with the money they're getting, with Jimmy seemingly also getting paid, and he announced whoever posted the top like reply to one of his tweets would get that money. Which I gotta say, I just want to see the P&L of Mr. Beast's ventures. Like, how much net revenue did Mr. Beast Burger get? Like, what are the numbers involved with Feastables? Because, like, we know that he's rich. But when he shares things like on a video that he recently did that cost $3 million, he only made $170,000. And I know that even when he gets sponsors for his video, like, he's not getting a rate that he deserves, just because like 95% of the sales teams out there right now just don't have the budget. Because guys getting like 250 to 350 million views per video. But all of that probably speaks to just how much money things like Feastables and his clothing makes. But that said, regarding Twitter, it's going to be very interesting to see how this continues. Because if we're being honest, Twitter's been in a very vulnerable place recently. Meta, of course, recently launching Threads, with that becoming one of the fastest growing social media apps of all time. time. Though, of course, that doesn't guarantee long-term success. That could peter out. And Twitter now paying creators could be a massive differentiator. But hey, like we always say, that's where we are here. It's going to be very interesting to see how things pan out. And in the meantime, I'd love to know your thoughts. And then Fox News is getting sued for defamation again, but this time it's by a Trump supporter. So let's break it down because it is a very weird one. Where this whole story centers around a guy by the name of Ray Epps, who was at pro-Trump rallies in DC in January of 2021, but is not known to have stormed the Capitol. But Epps still gained widespread attention because of two separate video clips. The first, which was taken the day before the insurrection, Epps is seen arguing with the far-right live streamer Baked Alaska, and there he can be heard encouraging Trump supporters to enter the Capitol during the planned protest the next day. And then the second clip of Epps was actually taken on January 6th in front of the Capitol. And there he's seen speaking with another protester who moments later joined others in breaching the police barricade in front of the Capitol. And with both these videos, Epps claims that he was just this innocent bystander, by saying he thought the Capitol was open to the public and that he was just trying to talk down the other protester on January 6th. But that put him on the Fed's radar. Then, a few days after the insurrection, the FBI uploaded a picture of Epps on its website and indicated that it was seeking information about it. So the agency eventually removing the picture several months later in July after interviewing Epps, and he was not ultimately prosecuted by the Justice Department. And so those factors, combined with the videos, became the basis of a far-right conspiracy that Epps was actually a federal agent who was trying to get Trump supporters to commit crimes. And now with this, of course, both Epps and the FBI have denied this, with Epps even testifying under oath before Congress that aside from previously serving in the Marine Corps, he did not have any connections to law enforcement or government agencies, including the FBI, CIA, and the National Security Agency. But the thing is, with something like this, like whatever he says and whatever evidence is there, it's not going to change a lot of minds. So, of course, there's been renewed attention as far as who is spreading this story about Epps. And who's at the center of that? None other than now ousted Tucker Carlson. With Carlson having repeatedly aired unfounded accusations on his show, platforming others who did the same, even at one point claiming Epps was the central figure and that he had helped stage manage the insurrection. And not only did that spread among far-right circles, it literally reached members of Congress and the Senate who further circulated the lie. Also, other Fox hosts promoted the false accusations, with a lawsuit specifically flagging a few instances on Laura Ingram's show, though the suit explicitly stating that Carlson was the main perpetrator here, saying Fox, and particularly Mr. Carlson, commenced a years-long campaign spreading falsehoods about Epps, and accusing the supposed news organization of sharing the lie to make Epps a scapegoat to deflect responsibility from Fox's own complicity in the January 6th violence, and going on to say that this is especially hypocritical because Epps was an avid and loyal Fox viewer and a fan of Mr. Carlson, and saying the reason he even went to DC in the first place was because Fox and his hosts literally told people the election had been stolen and encouraged them to support Trump's demonstrations on January 6th. And very notably here, Epps specifically alleges that Fox and its hosts knew the claims were false, adding, Fox engaged in purposeful avoidance of the truth, intentionally ignoring information and evidence that directly contradicted Fox's outlandish lies about Epps. Fox refused to retract, correct, or apologize for its demonstrably false and defamatory accusations against Epps well after Fox knew definitively that they were false, with Epps' lawyer even sending a letter this past March demanding that Fox and Carlson retract their claims about Epps and apologize, but neither responded. And so as a result, Epps said that the actions of Fox and Carlson totally destroyed his whole life, and both he and his wife received numerous threats, including death threats, eventually forcing them to sell their 5-acre ranch in Arizona and their wedding venue business at whatever price they could get and flee to a small RV in Utah. Though a very key thing that you need to remember with this story is we're talking about two situations. One is a conspiracy theory that he's this Fed that orchestrated January 6th, and the second is, well, what were his actions really at January 6th? Because even the lawsuit notes that this past May, the DOJ notified Epps that it would seek to charge him criminally for events on January 6th. And while details about the charges were not outlined, the suit claimed the relentless attacks by Fox and Mr. Carlson and the resulting political pressure likely resulted in the criminal charges, and adding that the criminal charges conclusively demonstrate the falsehood of the story that Mr. Carlson and Fox told about Epps. So essentially, one of their legal arguments is, I'm so not the fucking Fed that you said I am, I'm being charged because I'm one of you guys. But ultimately, that's what this mess looks like right now. We're gonna have to wait to see how it all plays out. But it's also especially gonna be interesting to see how the $787 million Dominion defamation settlement plays into all of it. Because after that, many experts speculated we would see other defamation suits against Fox for its election-related lies, and here we are. And then, y'all, it's summer and there's so much to do out there, and you beautiful bastards deserve to have some fun. Whether it be concerts, baseball, the theater, there's always a reason to get out of the house. And that's where the fantastic sponsor of today's show comes in, SeatGeek. With over 28 million downloads, SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app, and with Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Blink-182, and Drake on tour right now, you need to check out tickets near you on SeatGeek. And I always mention this because it's important, but I use SeatGeek before they're even a sponsor. Whether I want to go to a comedy show, a musical, maybe catch myself some Twice, or of course watch some sports, whether it be like a regular game, or I even used it to go to the Super Bowl. When we're looking for new things to do in LA, I automatically tap into the SeatGeek app to snag us seats, especially because SeatGeek wants to make sure that you're getting a good deal. So when you're on the app, look for the green dots. Green means good deal, red means bad. And remember, every ticket is backed by their buyer guarantee, and SeatGeek is the only site that lets you return your tickets ahead of the event with swaps. And the most important thing, you get $20 off your first purchase with promo code Phil. So go treat yourself and a loved one to a fun summer night out. So click the link in the description down below to download the app and have yourself an even better summer. And then, the only thing worse than a deadly tragedy tragedy is a preventable deadly tragedy. And when it comes to last month's shipwreck in the Mediterranean, one of the deadliest in history, we now know it was actually very preventable. So this story starts with some 750 migrants and refugees, mostly from Pakistan, Egypt, and Syria, paying smugglers in Libya to get them to Europe. With all of them desperate, many fleeing war, poverty, and climate change, and a family member of one of the passengers explaining, Europe doesn't understand. We don't leave because we want to. There is simply nothing for us in Pakistan. And so the smugglers cram them all into a fishing boat, shoulder to shoulder. They're unable to move, with women and children being packed below in the hold. And one man whose brother spoke to him just after border telling reporters,
as soon as he got into the boat, he said only 50 people will fit, and they were putting 750 on board. He said it's 100% sure it'll take in water. I told him to get off, don't go, and he said the mafia won't let us. They have guns, they have knives, they were forcing people in.
And on June 9th, the boat called the Adriana departs for Italy. But on the second day, the engine begins to break down, and so the crew fixes it, but keeps breaking again every few hours. And by the third day, the food and the water have run out, and people begin to panic, with one man describing dozens of people shaking, some fainting and falling to the floor, others possibly fighting. Then on the fifth day, an activist gets the first of many distress signals coming from the boat and alerts Italian, Greek, and Maltese officials. But notably, the Adriana is in Greece's search and rescue region, so around 10 o'clock in the morning, the Italians alert the Greeks as to what's up. Right, and it should have been a relatively easy rescue operation with the skies clear, the water calm. Yet despite even more distress calls coming in, nothing happens until 2:35 p.m. when the Greek Coast Guard sends a helicopter that clearly sees the vessel is overcrowded. And so they enlist a civilian tanker called the Lucky Sailor, which spots the Adriana at 4:50. But as it approaches, it reports that people on board gesture for it to go away while shouting Italy, with an English speaker reportedly contacting the Coast Guard and stating the Adriana is not in danger, saying it only needs food and water. And so the Lucky Sailor, they drop off some food and water, and then they leave around 8:40. But meanwhile, through all this happening, distress calls warn the boat that it's rolling side to side and it's barely moving forward. And so the Coast Guard enlists another tanker, this one called the Faithful Warrior, to approach the Adriana, and they also encounter similar resistance from the passengers. But also survivors later said that the tanker churned up waves that threatened to capsize their boat. And the tanker's captain reporting that the boat is swaying dangerously, but he attributed that to the excessive number of people on board, not the waves. Then it's about 10:45 at night by the time a Coast Guard patrol finally arrives, ties a rope to the Adriana, and notes the condition of the fishing boat was good, but there was shouting and tension between the people on board. And then according to the patrol, people on the Adriana rejected their help, untied the rope, and restarted their engine. And at 12:40 a.m., the Coast Guard receives what it claims to be the first call about engine trouble. But then boom, just past 1 in the morning, the Adriana suddenly capsizes. And after all is said and done, only 104 men were rescued, meaning more than 600 people, including roughly 100 children, reported to have been in the holds, presumably drowned. With tons of people shocked, the victims' families grieving, and everyone asking the question, why weren't they rescued? And at the time, the Coast Guard's story was that the Adriana appeared to be sailing at a steady course and speed. Its crew rejected offers for help, then tipping over when people on board panicked and started to move, shifting their weight around. But investigations from the Washington Post and other outlets have cast doubt on those claims, showing pretty conclusively that both the boat's course and speed fluctuated dramatically throughout the day, often consistent with it drifting with the current, as well as experts stating that its erratic movements, as well as videos showing smoke billowing from the boat, are consistent with engine problems. And as far as the crew refusing help, there were several problems with that point, with one of the key ones being that the Coast Guard got numerous distress calls hours in advance, with it also failing to consider that the people shooing it away might not represent everyone on board, because obviously smugglers are afraid to accept help because they could get arrested, and that's actually something that happened. With 9 Egyptian crew members now being held in pretrial custody in Greece and facing charges including illegal trafficking of foreigners, causing a shipwreck, and negligent homicide. And it being argued that even if any passengers were resisting help, they may have been doing so out of fear. And that's because Greece has a reputation for aggressively pushing migrant boats out of its zone of responsibility. Plus, survivors said they recalled some of the men on the patrol boat were wearing balaclavas, which they could find intimidating. And with that, it turns out that the patrol boat's crew included 4 special ops members. And it also argued that even if the Coast Guard's intentions were good, its much larger ships often create waves that endanger smaller migrant boats. With one survivor explaining what happened when the Faithful Warrior, which was 9 times the size of the Adriana, approached, saying they threw ropes to get closer, but as they pulled, we almost capsized. They threw bottles of water, but as people tried to catch the bottles, there was too much movement, and again, we almost capsized. One person shouted, "We don't want water like that. Take us or we will drown," saying we never refused the water. We were scared that we will capsize. That's why we cut the rope and we moved away. And then as far as the claim that the Adriana capsized on its own, that seems to be contradicted by numerous survivor stories, with many recalling that the Coast Guard tried to tow their boat toward Italy.
They decided to throw us a rope, so the guys at the front tied it. They towed us. The boat tilted to the right and everyone was screaming. People began falling into the sea, and the boat capsized. People couldn't get out from under the boat.
And another saying they were right next to us when it capsized. In the moment it sank, they moved away from us. Which notably, if true, would not be the first time something like that has happened. Right, in 2014, Greek authorities tried to tow a boat with a rope that was too short, too fast, causing it to sink and killing 11 people, with the European Court of Human Rights handing down a fine for that incident last year. And then finally, it's argued that even if the Coast Guard didn't make all those mistakes, maritime law experts say that it could have done so much more, not least by deploying its own specialized rescue vehicles and calling in assets from Italy and Frontex, right, rather than just sending one little patrol boat. Also, also saying then it should have handed out life preservers and jackets in case the boat sank or anyone fell overboard. And when it approached, it could have dispatched 2 small boats on both sides of the Adriana so people don't rush to one side and tip it over. And in addition to all that, establishing clear lines of communication with the crew in multiple languages. And so for all those reasons, we've seen protests in Greece as well as formal investigations into the incident. But it's also very likely going to be a long time before there's any sort of insider justice here. I mean, if at all, and that's because the case could take years to wind its way through the European courts. But with all that, and as we wait to see what happens next, I'd love to know your thoughts on those comments down below. And then, money can't buy you love, but it can buy you the US political system. Right? Political contributions from outside groups, special interest corporations, and the wealthy have been flooding American politics ever since the Supreme Court ruled on Citizens United back in 2010, without effectively rolling back centuries of campaign finance restrictions while also giving corporate powers a blank check to make unlimited donations in federal elections. And that opened the door for a massive jump in dark money spending, which is when money is spent to influence elections, but the source of that funding is kept secret. Right? And dark money spending is usually done through nonprofits that are generally not legally required to disclose their donors, as well as through shell companies that can give unlimited donations to super PACs. And those dark money funds have been steadily increasing over the election cycle since 2010. In fact, according to a new analysis of Federal Election Commission data by the nonprofit Open Secrets, federal political committees reported taking in $615 million from dark money groups and shell companies during the 2022 election. And that is huge. That is a record figure representing the most contributions by far in any midterm election since Citizens United. Now, notably here, the $615 million in political contributions is slightly less than the $653 million the federal political committees reported during the 2020 election. But that's because in addition to congressional races, there was also the battle for president between Trump and Biden, which notably was the most expensive federal election cycle in history, with spending on that specific presidential election raking in more than double what was spent in 2008, 2012, and 2016. And so the fact that the 2022 midterm election saw contributions that were not far behind the 2020 numbers is absolutely crazy. Right? The donations in 2022 alone made up nearly a quarter of the $2.6 billion in dark money spending and contributions reported to the FEC that Open Secrets has been tracking since 2010. And y'all, not only did 2022 spending break the record for midterms, it did so by a fucking exponential margin. Right? According to Open Secrets, federal political committees reported over 3 times more political contributions from dark money groups and shell companies during the 2022 cycle than they did during the 2018 midterm cycle. Meanwhile, as more dark money flows into the elections, dark money groups are reporting less and less to the FEC. And 501c4 nonprofits that are not required to disclose their donors reported just under $25 million in spending for the 2022 cycle, that notably being the single lowest amount since the Citizens United decision. And a really key thing is that this drop in disclosures and 501c4 spending, it comes at the same time as gray money spending has absolutely exploded, which if you're unfamiliar, you need some context here. As the nonprofit Brennan Center for Justice explains, gray money is spending by state super PACs that reported other PACs as donors, making it impossible to identify original donors without sifting through multiple layers of PAC disclosures. Right, while super PACs are required under federal law to disclose their donors, that basically means nothing if their contributions come from shell companies and dark money groups that don't disclose their donors. Right, so the actual source of the funding still remains a secret. And gray money groups represent massive amounts of political donation, with Open Secrets finding that these groups reported spending $1.4 billion in the 2022 election cycle. That means, listen up, they accounted for nearly 70% of all outside spending from non-party committees. And that's the same percentage that gray money made up in 2020, which also saw record spending by gray money groups funded in part by shell companies and 501c groups that did not disclose their donors, totaling around $2 billion. And again, that is a massive jump from just a few years ago, with gray money spending totaling under $400 million in 2018. Also, another really interesting aspect of this new report is while people often associate the support for Citizens United and dark money with conservatives and opposition with liberals, it's actually the Democrats that have benefited from more dark money donations in the last 3 election cycles, including 2022, with liberal committees reporting $316.4 million in contributions from undisclosed sources, as well as another $14.3 million in spending from liberal 501c nonprofits and other dark money groups. By contrast, conservative political committees donated $263 million to Republicans, and conservative 501c nonprofits that don't disclose donors reported giving $5.2 million in direct spending. Though, notably here, asterisk, those figures do not include spending for boosting candidates without explicitly calling for their election or defeat, which they are generally not legally required to disclose to the FEC. But also, that's just a fraction of the bigger picture here, right? According to Open Secrets, dark money groups poured even more into spending on advertising and other communications boosting candidates without calling for their election or defeat. And in regards to both contributions and ads, dark money groups that are affiliated with Democratic or Republican leadership in Congress have consistently poured more into federal elections than any other dark money group, with that also extending to 2022, with dark money groups connected to the top-ranking Republican and Democrats in Congress together pouring more than $350 million from undisclosed donors into the last midterms. And all these sneaky fuckers are often able to skirt certain FEC disclosure requirements. For example, Open Secrets reported that the dark money group One Nation, which is connected to Senate Republican leadership, they reportedly spent more than $146.5 million on ads and contributions for 2022 without disclosing any spending to the FEC. That's more than any other dark money group spent, but also those numbers were still considerable. Majority Forward, the primary dark money group tied to Senate Democrats, actually spent slightly more on contributions than One Nation did, but less in ads. ads, with the group reportedly spending more than $102 million in 2022. But reportedly, that is just a conservative estimate, and one that doesn't include the millions of dollars that the dark money group spent on other activities such as voter registration efforts. And then, shifting gears, keep in mind, we are very likely going to see, once again, record-breaking numbers for the 2024 election cycle, with all these dark money groups from the shadows just fucking playing puppet master. And that brings us to the end of this Sunday dive into the news. Now, for more news you need to know, I got you covered right here or in those links down below. And if you're all caught up on that, do not worry, because my name's Philip DeFranco. You've just been filled in. I love yo faces, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow.